We know that to lose significant body fat, we need to eat in a consistent calorie deficit over time. However, one reason why many people struggle to adhere to a calorie deficit is due to the feeling of hunger or the desire to eat. In this video, we will cover some strategies which can help to minimize hunger so that we can better adhere to a calorie deficit. Before we discuss the specific strategies of how to minimize hunger, we first need to understand the basic concept of energy balance. This simply refers to energy intake versus energy expenditure, which determines our change in body weight over time. Energy intake comes from the calories we consume in our food and drink each day, while energy expenditure is a combination of our metabolic rate, the thermic effect of food, and movement via physical activity. We could go into much more detail on each of these topics, but for this video we will only be focusing on the energy intake side of the equation. So basically, if we eat more calories than we burn, we will gain weight. If we eat equal calories to what we burn, we will maintain weight, and if we eat less calories than we burn, we will lose weight. So for significant fat loss to occur, we want to be in this third category, a calorie deficit, while simultaneously preserving muscle mass through resistance training. So it seems pretty simple. We just need to eat fewer calories over time and we can get super lean. Well, in theory, yes. However, in reality, it is very difficult for many people to adhere to this calorie deficit for a variety of reasons. And one of these reasons is due to the feeling of hunger during a calorie deficit. While hunger is a normal response to have when eating in a deficit, excessive or prolonged hunger can completely throw you off your diet and result in a rapid regain of your lost body fat. So in this video, we will explore some strategies to help trainees minimize hunger in order to make the fat loss process more adherent and sustainable. The first strategy is to establish an appropriate rate of weight loss. Our rate of weight loss will be determined by the magnitude of the calorie deficit. For example, if our maintenance calories are approximately 2,800, we need to eat less than this to be in a deficit and lose weight. So the question is, how much of a deficit should we be in? Should we cut calories by 1,000 and eat 1,800 calories? Or should we just eat the minimum amount required to be in a deficit, such as eating 2,700? In a larger deficit, we will lose weight at a faster rate, while with a more conservative deficit, we will still lose weight, but at a slower rate. Neither of these is inherently better or worse, but there are implications for both strategies. Essentially, we probably don't want to lose weight too fast in most cases. A bigger calorie deficit will result in more pronounced hunger during the diet, whereas a more conservative deficit will usually result in more manageable hunger. This will increase our chances of actually sticking to the diet, even if it takes longer to reach our weight loss goals. For some people, a specific rate of weight loss may be required if you have a time frame that you want to be leaner by, such as physique athletes or those dieting for a certain event. However, most of us don't have a specific time frame, which means there is no slowest rate of weight loss. So trainees can be in a very small deficit over time and make small weight loss steps over a longer period of time to mitigate hunger. And as a bonus, we generally find that losing weight at a slower rate generally results in less muscle loss and a greater proportion of fat loss. For example, this study explored the effects of two different rates of weight loss on body composition changes during a resistance training program. As we can see, both groups lost the same total amount of body weight, but losing weight at a slower rate resulted in a small increase in lean mass and a greater proportion of fat loss. Whereas the fast weight loss group actually lost a little bit of lean mass and therefore lost less total fat mass. The second strategy to minimize hunger during a deficit is for food selection. We generally want to try and select foods which have a high volume relative to the amount of calories they consist of. In other words, foods with a low calorie density. This will allow us to eat a greater volume of food with the same or even less calories. This is likely to keep us feeling more satiated compared with eating the same amount of calories from more calorie-dense foods. For example, this classic study had subjects rate how full they felt after eating a range of different common foods in portions of exactly the same calories. As we can see, the most satiating foods like boiled potatoes, lean fish, and oatmeal are also generally those with the lowest calorie density. And on the other end of the spectrum, the least satiating foods were also generally those with the highest calorie density, such as croissants, cakes, and donuts. So to mitigate hunger, we want to try and select the foods with less calories per unit of weight. This will likely keep us more satiated, allowing us to stay fuller even while eating the same amount of calories. A simple strategy to help achieve this is by including at least a serving of fruits or vegetables in each meal. This is because these foods usually have a very low calorie density, allowing our meals to be more voluminous with minimal additional calories. The next strategy to minimize hunger is to consume a high protein intake. We know that a high protein intake will help us build or retain more muscle mass during a diet, but it can also have an influence on hunger and satiety. We generally find that high protein diets tend to result in lower hunger and greater satiety throughout the day. For example, this study compared the effects of a maintenance calorie diet with either 10 or 30% of the calories coming from protein. As we can see, the higher protein group experienced less hunger throughout the day and greater satiety over a 24-hour period compared with a lower protein group. This study suggests that a high protein intake can help us feel fuller throughout the day. This will obviously help us consume less calories, assisting the weight loss process over time. Also, unrelated to hunger and satiety, a high protein intake will also help us to retain more muscle mass during the dieting process. This means a larger proportion of the weight being lost will come from fat mass rather than muscle tissue. So as a practical recommendation, trainees should try to incorporate lean protein foods with each meal and try to accumulate a total of at least 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. The next strategy to help minimize hunger during a diet is to manipulate meal frequency. Meal frequency refers to how many meals per day we split our total calorie intake between. For example, if we wanted to consume 2,800 calories per day, this could be achieved by eating 2 meals with 1,400 calories each, 3 meals with 933 calories each, 4 meals with 700 calories each, and so on. In any case, the total daily intake is the same, but how many meals are consumed is different. Although this seems like it wouldn't make much difference because calories are equated, a lower meal frequency may actually result in lower overall hunger and greater satiety. Although we don't have much direct research demonstrating this, we do have indirect research that we have to make inferences from. For example, this study looked at diet patterns of regular people over a multi-year period. It was found that those who consumed fewer meals per day generally lost more weight compared with those consuming more meals per day who tended to gain weight. This study doesn't tell us that meal frequency can specifically impact hunger and satiety, but it does tell us that a lower meal frequency may increase our chances of weight loss. And we can speculate that this may be at least in part due to a reduction in hunger levels. The next strategy we have is to implement time-restricted feeding into our eating habits. This refers to the window that we consume our total daily calorie intake within. For example, if we were to eat 3 meals per day at 8 AM, 1 PM, and 6 PM, that would be a 10-hour feeding window. However, if we shifted our breakfast forward by an hour and our dinner back by an hour, that would make our feeding window 8 hours long. So total daily calorie intake and meal frequency are the same, but we are consuming this in a shorter feeding window. Shortening this feeding window generally tends to result in lower hunger levels and greater satiety across the day. For example, this study explored the effects of eating 3 meals per day with different feeding windows for 4 days straight. One group ate their 3 meals within a 12-hour feeding window between 8 AM and 8 PM, while the time-restricted feeding group ate their meals within a 6-hour feeding window between 8 AM and 2 PM. It was found that over a 24-hour period, the time-restricted feeding group reported slightly lower hunger and desire to eat and slightly greater fullness compared with the regular feeding group. Once again, these results were small but consistent, suggesting that restricting our feeding window may help us to mitigate hunger to a small extent. Just like the other strategies discussed, this can help us to adhere better to a calorie deficit to lose weight. The next strategy is not a nutrition intervention, but rather to do with physical activity. In this case, physical activity refers to all general movement throughout the day. This includes planned exercise like resistance training or dedicated cardio, but also encompasses what we call non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT for short. NEAT is basically the movements we perform throughout the day, which aren't really dedicated forms of exercise. They are just movements required to perform our daily tasks. This includes movements such as walking around the house, picking items up and putting them back down, head movements, arm movements, and all other subconscious movements you can think of. The best way to quantify total daily physical activity levels is to use a step tracker. This will track all your steps you take throughout the day and accumulate your total step count at the end of the day, so you can get a decent estimate of your overall physical activity levels. Like we mentioned at the beginning of the video, physical activity is one way that we expend energy. This itself is already a benefit for weight loss because it helps to put us in a more negative energy balance. However, physical activity can also influence the other side of the equation, which is energy intake. We generally find that those performing higher levels of physical activity on a daily basis tend to have better regulation of hunger and satiety. For example, this study compared the habitual eating behaviors between people who exercise regularly versus those who don't exercise at all. All subjects were fed a 600 calorie meal on an empty stomach. Then 1 hour later, a buffet-style meal was provided where the subjects were able to eat as much or as little as they preferred. As we can see, those who exercised regularly consumed significantly less calories at this buffet meal compared with the non-exercisers. What this suggests is that exercise somewhat helps us to regulate our hunger and satiety, where we actually feel more satiated after eating a regular meal. This means we are less likely to overeat and rather eat in accordance with our actual energy needs. This can help us only eat when we are actually hungry and only eat to a point of satisfaction rather than eating when we don't actually require energy. And the last strategy we have is not about minimizing hunger at all. It is about accepting some hunger at certain times. While we want to do our best to minimize hunger overall, unfortunately we can't completely eliminate it at all times. Our body uses hunger and satiety to regulate our body weight. If we are in a negative energy balance, there are physiological processes which cause us to feel slightly more hungry. So rather than trying to fight hunger all the time, we need to accept that when dieting, a small amount of hunger at certain times is going to be present. Obviously, we don't want to endure excessive hunger all the time, as this may cause us to binge eat or go off the diet altogether. However, slight hunger is probably actually a positive sign. It usually means that we are in a calorie deficit and we are likely losing fat. Therefore, trainees should do their best to minimize hunger, but a small amount every so often is probably a good sign that the diet is working effectively. So to summarize this video, let's establish some practical recommendations. For significant weight loss, we need to eat in a consistent calorie deficit over time. One of the limiting factors for people adhering to a deficit is managing our hunger throughout the diet. So if we can minimize hunger during the dieting process, we are more likely to adhere to it consistently and achieve better weight loss results. Some strategies to minimize hunger are to eat in a smaller calorie deficit, consume high volume foods, ensure your diet has a high protein intake, eat fewer meals per day, restrict your feeding window, and to increase your total daily physical activity levels. However, even with all of these strategies in place, we are still likely to feel some amount of hunger during a calorie deficit, due to the physiological processes which try to keep us at homeostasis. Therefore, it is best to accept small amounts of hunger at certain times and realize that this is an inevitable feeling to experience. Therefore, trainees should try to minimize hunger to improve adherence using these strategies, but ultimately accept that a small but realistic level of hunger is going to be present at certain times. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Check out flowhighperformance.com for online coaching, training templates, ebooks, and more.